everyone. Welcome to yet another fantastic episode of SheSight Magazine's podcast. SheSight Magazine, as you know, is an international women's success magazine and has been featuring fantastic women's stories across the globe. Women who impact, women who inspire. All those stories are there in our website as well as in our e-magazine. Do check it out, www.shesightmag.com. Do subscribe and stay tuned with all the wonderful women's stories across the globe. And I'm so delighted to welcome a fantastic, inspiring, and impactful women leader who is impacting with her work in a very, very niche segment, which is called bias changing. Let me introduce the speaker for the day, Miss Smita Tharoor. Smita is a TEDx speaker, founder of Tharoor Associates, co-founder of Culturelytics, associate lecturer at University of Arts, London. And she has over 25 years of experience within corporate, regional, and international frameworks in large bodies, including private and public sector undertakings. She has considerable experience in embedding a coaching culture into organizations and providing them with a lot of leadership insights and other things. She specializes in leadership development, strategy development, coaching, and people development, and aligning an organization's principles to both internal and external stakeholders. But if you ask me, what is her core methodology? It is all about unconscious bias. Smita is a recipient of Global Diversity Leadership Award from the World HRD Congress in 2017 for her work that she has done in the UK, Europe, US, and India on unconscious bias. Apart from all her professional achievements and work that she's doing, she's also belonging to the wonderful Tharoor family, comprising of glorious brother Shashi Tharoor, who is a parliamentarian in India, as well as who was part of the United Nations earlier, and of course her sister Shobha Tharoor. And I think the entire Tharoor family has been contributing a lot to the world, and Smita has been a champion of unconscious bias. Let's hear more from her. Let's put our hands together and welcome Smita Tharoor to this episode of SheSight's She Tycoon.
Thank you, Chandra, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. As we were saying earlier, you and I have known each other for good 8 years, and I have always been so impressed with all that you are doing for women in India and supporting them in their growth and their development. So when you invited me to be part of this podcast, it was a definite yes, because anything that you do is a good thing, and I've seen that.
So let's dive into the topic more, and to start off, definitely I want you to give us a very, very simple layman explanation of what is unconscious bias.
So what is unconscious bias? Let's just take the two words separately. And let's take the second word first, the word bias. Now, we actually have a negative connotation towards it. We think it's something that we don't like, that, it's an instinctive, unconscious bias connotation towards the word bias. But actually, the word bias simply means preference. That's all it is, a preference for or against something.
Right.
So let's imagine I say to you, Chandra, when I wake up in the morning, I have a bias towards starting my morning with a cup of tea. What about you? We don't usually use that word in that context, but I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
I have a preference. That's all it is.
Right.
But society and language has changed over many, many years. And now when we use the word bias, it is very much suggested that it is negative. That's not how I see it. I use the word bias as a preference. Now you put the first word back in, which is unconscious. And unconscious simply means I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I have this preference. That's it. So for example, you are going to buy a blouse and you go into a shop and there are a rack of blouses and your hand instinctively goes out for the green one.
Right.
You didn't think, you just reached out for it like that. That was instinctive, that was unconscious. You then stop, you look at the material, you look at the size, you look at the style. It then becomes a conscious bias if you choose to buy it.
Right.
So that's a simple answer on what is unconscious bias.
And
it's for all.
Yeah, it's definitely the most simplest answer. But I know how complicated the concept is when
yes.
our lives and workplace especially.
Absolutely.
Can you share some stories of changing the biases? Maybe we'll start with that, the positive side of it, like how we can actually alter our biases, and any good stories or experience, what do you call it, instances which you have seen that has led to a positive outcome.
Sure, absolutely. So many stories in my head. Certainly one story that I think of very often is not my personal story, but it's a story that somebody shared with me, a stranger who I don't know and I've never met ever since. But I was speaking at a conference in Philadelphia. This is a long time ago, probably 10 years ago, maybe more. And after the conference, and I was talking about my favorite subject, which is the idea of unconscious bias. And I was talking about the idea of how our unconscious biases limit us. And this conference that I was speaking at was a women's only conference. And so I had a room of, I don't know, I'm making up the number, but give or take 700 women.
Okay.
And I'm talking to these 700 women about how do I, or you, any one of us women who is listening to this, limit ourselves because of our unconscious biases? And how do we get influenced by that without realizing? And so I talked obviously at some length. After the conference, this lady came up to me, and she was a white American.
Okay.
She looked, I'm guessing her age. I didn't ask her age. I didn't even ask her name. Yeah. Looked to me in her mid-30s. She said to me that she was of Italian origin, and she grew up in what we in India call a joint family system. Right. Or in the West, we call it an extended family system. So in other words, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody under one roof. I don't know where she lived because the conference from anywhere in the US. And she said growing up, she grew up in very much a male-dominated home, where the men had a voice, but the women did not have a voice. Yeah. And so
that's quite common. This every part of the world.
Common, extremely common anywhere in the world, which is why I thought you would appreciate the story. And so she could be sitting around the dinner table and she might want to add some value to the conversation. She would not be given the time to speak. She would not be given the respect to be heard. Now, why was she saying all this to me? She says, do you know, I have just realized something. I've had an epiphany. Okay. When I am sitting at meetings in the office, and they're group meetings, I always have something to contribute, but I never open my mouth. Why? Because her unconscious bias was, there is no point opening your mouth.
Right. Because you've conditioned in your family that way.
Exactly. So the point of unconscious bias is, I simply talked about a cup of tea in the morning, but something happens, and then what you do, what I do, what we do, is that we've not liked that experience. And then to protect ourselves, it becomes something that we never try to repeat. It becomes learned behavior. And we don't think about it. Correct. So for example, again, I'm being very simplistic. Let's imagine you grew up in Cochin in Kerala. When you were growing up, for your entire childhood, say 0 to 18, your parents always said to you, don't ever go to Calcutta. Calcutta is a horrible place. It's a frightening place. Don't go there. You're going to get mugged. You'll get beaten up. You'll get no job opportunity, X, Y, Z. And you've never been to Calcutta. For some reason, you arrive in Calcutta at the age of 21. The chances are you're not going to like it.
Exactly. True.
Because your narrative, your biases have influenced you in such a way. So now go back to this Italian girl. She suddenly realized that she's been protecting herself from being shot down by her family. And that's been part of her DNA, for want of a better word. And she needed to break that cycle of self-limitation with her own unconscious biases.
Right.
So her unconscious bias in this regard was, don't speak up because there's no point, you'd only be shot down.
Correct. Exactly.
And therefore that happened in any situation. And she needed to break that.
That brings me to the next question. How do we break it? I think that is the biggest challenge, right?
That is what we call a very large, multi-layered question.
Yeah.
Very simply put, it's about reflection. So find something that you've done instinctively. For example, those of us who are listening to this interview right now maybe might be in the recruitment arena.
Yeah.
And let's imagine, I'm talking about me, I have completed the interview and I have chosen to hire you. And there were two other people I also interviewed, two men and you. And I've chosen to hire you. And I am telling myself that I've chosen to hire you because you did the better interview. But is that really true? Or is my unconscious bias favoring women as opposed to men?
I mean, that's
a
good bias if you ask me.
That's a conscious bias, right?
Yeah, I'm okay with that bias.
Not okay with that one, but it's not fair.
Yeah,
the point about any kind of bias is if the outcome is unfair.
Yeah.
Let's imagine that those two gentlemen genuinely had the better CV than you. Genuinely did in every which way.
Right.
And yet I've chosen to give it to you only for one reason alone, right. Because of your gender. That is wrong. Yeah. Or because of your ethnicity.
It can also happen, right? Where women are rejected because of their gender.
Same point. The exact same point. I'm deliberately playing devil's advocate and saying this. So what is that can we do to challenge our bias? So there I am. I finished my interviews today. I'm going to have to make a decision by tomorrow. I must give some time aside to once again look at my three candidates and ask myself, was there any instinctive unconscious bias that came in? Or it could even be something even simpler, like my previous story. It could be there are three candidates. One is from Kerala, one is from Calcutta, and the third is from, Delhi. And the Calcutta person, doesn't matter what their gender is the one with the best CV. But I'm not going to give it to them because I have been brought up to believe that all things Calcuttan is wrong. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes,
so really, you then have to stop. Right. So the only way, it's a longer answer to your short question, is how do you challenge it? You have to stop. The chances are you will not stop when you have made that conclusion. When you've jumped to that conclusion, and jump is the operative word, you won't stop. You've made that decision. Right. But can you then look back on it? Will you allow yourself the time to look back on it and then challenge yourself and ask, was that really the right decision I made? Was that a fair decision? The idea of fairness is very, very important when we're thinking unconscious bias under any context.
Correct. Yeah. So it takes a lot of personal growth exercise, I would say, like, reflection, as you said. It's probably overcoming all our biases is, I would say, vast majority of our lifetime would be spent on that, I guess.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. But sometimes it's okay not to challenge those unconscious biases. And I'll tell you why that is. Because I would never for a minute, none of us have the right to tell somebody else to challenge their unconscious bias because we don't know what their story is.
Exactly.
So depending on the trauma that they might have experienced. See, a question that perhaps we need to think about before we think about how to be challenged. If I may pause the question and go back a bit. We talked about what is unconscious bias, but you haven't asked how do we get them?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Of course,
so
let's just mention the story that while we grow up and while the society...
Yeah, that's one example. That's one example of why we're growing up. But suppose you only had one life experience, just one. Yeah. But it was a very, 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 very traumatic experience. And you can add a few more berries. I don't want to explain what that berry looked like. If you like, for the context of this conversation, we can make up a story. You can make up a story of having a very traumatic divorce from somebody. Yeah. And that somebody happens to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. It could be just a profession, right? That trauma is so...
The next time we see, I see a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, automatically that bias comes in, and then...
Exactly. And it could be a different gender, but you still don't want to have anything to do with it.
Correct. Yeah.
Because that trauma was so much. So it is about how do you protect... See, why do we have unconscious biases? Very often it is to protect ourselves. We want to keep safe, right? Exactly. All of us want to keep safe. And we want to make sure that we are in a safe environment wherever we go.
True.
You know, mothers have asked me about, what do? I have an 18-year-old daughter and I worry about her. And I tell her, I don't want to be biased towards her and say, you can't stay out late at night, you have to come home. And then I have a son and I allow him to do masti. And that's not fair, is it? Because therefore I'm being biased. And I say, no, because you're also being safe. Because we can't control the society. But all we can do is think about what is our narrative, our story, and then challenge within us how we can manage it.
Exactly. That's a very, that's a unique perspective which I got today. That is, biases are actually a defense mechanism or something which is used by ourselves as a safeguarding mechanism for us. That's a very interesting perspective. In the workplace context, in the corporate or in the any workplace context, you mentioned about biases that could occur in the hiring scenario, but what about other biases? How it can affect in our workplace? I know there are 180 plus cognitive biases in the literature. Can we touch upon a few of them, which could be quite
absolutely.
Let's difficult for any workplace to handle?
Yeah. Let's think of availability bias.
Right.
Okay, availability bias, simply put, and Harvard University did the research on this. And this wonderful Indian origin woman called Mazareen Banerjee, she's from Hyderabad, the Parsi from Hyderabad. She's the person who did the research on it and told us about it. And essentially, Mazareen Banerjee is saying, what is availability bias? It's simply put, at work, what we tend to do is we take what is easily available and have a bias that is the right option. So one example that she had is that she was invited into an organization, and in that organization, she was told that women were leaving very quickly, and the assumption was the women were leaving because of maternity. Okay. And therefore, the recruiters decided that there is no point hiring many women because they're going to have high attrition. Right. So they were changing their whole recruitment drive because they felt this is not working. So their availability bias was essentially making assumptions about the fact that women leave, and then why did they leave? They were making assumptions on that, and decided that there's no point, and we'll just not recruit. Mazareen Banerjee went into this organization, did the research, and found that both men and women left for the same reasons.
Oh, really?
They wanted another job somewhere else, better money, better pay, something else. And so
it was just an assumption that women left for maternity.
Exactly. It was purely an assumption based on what little limited information was available. So little information is available. They don't want to spend time to get more information. Maybe out of 50 women leaving, 10 did leave for maternity.
Right.
So they looked at those 10. They didn't look at the remaining 40. I don't have the statistics. I'm making this up. Or the name of the company. But they looked at those 10. That was only a little bit of information available.
Right.
And they used that as an availability bias and chose not to think any differently. Because guess what? It makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah.
So that's one example, availability bias. Confirmation bias. Oh my, that's an easy one. We do it all the time. Every one of us wants to be right. Nobody likes to be wrong, right?
Yeah.
If I say, no, Chandra, you have no clue what I'm talking about, you're wrong, you're not going to feel good about yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do unconsciously, don't forget, these are all cognitive biases that are unconscious, don't forget that. So what we tend to do is we implicitly, unconsciously find reasons to prove ourselves right. I'm just trying to think of an example. Think of the recruitment example that I told you about, not hiring the Calcuttan. Because, and you're not even going to allow yourself to think about the fact that you were brought up not to like anybody from Bengal. That is not coming into your head. You blocked it out. It's all instinctive. That is the power of our brain. It's all entirely instinctive. You block out the bits that actually have influenced you, and you find reasons to prove yourself right. See, so-and-so said da-da-da-da-da. So that was a good tick in their behavior. And then let's think about appraisals. For those of us who do appraisals, Now, those of us who are listening to this podcast, who are managers and do regular appraisals, okay, I can guarantee there is somebody in their team who they find very difficult.
Right. And
That is
they're the ones who ask questions.
And you know what they do? You know what tends to happen in this confirmation bias? So let's imagine I have to appraise you. And in my opinion, you are a very difficult employee.
Right.
I just don't enjoy my appraisal with you ever. And that's how it has been for a long time. And you've been in our company for 5 years. And I think, oh God, and before I even meet you, my head is going, oh God, I have to meet Chandra again. Now that's going to be a difficult one. Now, it doesn't matter what you say. I will only hear what I want to hear.
Correct. I think it's the same with husband and wife.
There is a lot of confirmation bias in there. Well said. Absolutely right. Absolutely. You know, because we just do. In any close relationship, we jump to conclusions because you know what? You're not even listening to me, I say.
Right.
And he's saying, hang on a minute, I've heard every word you've said. But he has not heard, he's heard what he wants to hear, and I've heard what I want to hear. And that is confirmation bias. Let's think of another one. Anchor is obviously an anchor that a ship puts down to keep safe. Now that is an extremely good bias, and I'm using the word good in inverted commas, that a manager can use to influence her team.
Right.
I'll explain to you how. And in fact, I'll give you the research that Daniel Kahneman did for this. The availability was Mazari and Banerjee, but Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, he did a test on anchor bias, and I'm making up the age because I read the book a very long time ago. But essentially, he put two groups of people. This is in the United States, and he said to group one, how old was Mahatma Gandhi when he died? Was he, and this number I'm making up because I can't remember, was he 42? And in group two, he said, how old was Mahatma Gandhi when he died? Was he 98?
Right.
Now, what the groups did is they took that number as an anchor. And they felt safe. Why? Because unconsciously, what Daniel Kahneman was doing was manipulating the way they think.
Right. Correct.
You see what I'm saying? So I feel safe. You've asked me this question. Daniel Kahneman is asking me this question. Obviously, he must be somewhere near age 42. Correct. So group one guessed an age that was closer to 42. Correct. And group two guessed an age that was closer to 98.
Right. Yeah.
And of course, they were both wrong. But
this is very relevant in marketing and sales where,
Very much. I was about to say that. Car sales people, they are best at manipulating the customer with anchor bias. They have been trained on that.
Right. Even I think in online platforms, websites where you are going to purchase a subscription or anything like that, I think there will be, just for the audience, like there will be 3 packages or 4 packages, and there is an anchor, which means you want to choose the middle one. That's another one, right? I think is it anchor bias or is it something else? I don't know.
It's part of, see, don't forget also, we've only talked about 3 biases, but don't forget that these biases all work together, right?
Yeah. It's a combination.
They're not all standalone. They're all just, they're all mixed together in big fat one pot, being stirred around by what you call your brain, which you take wherever you go. You can't leave it behind for the day. And depending on the mood, the day you've had the day before, things will just jump in and influence you.
So it's all about taking decisions, and decision making is where all this biases becomes problematic, or sometimes actually it helps also, I think.
Of course it can help. That is why I don't want people to assume that having an unconscious bias is a negative thing. Having unconscious bias is a negative thing if the outcome is unfair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Simply put, no matter what it is you're doing, so you must ask yourself the next day or the next hour, if you can, has the decision that I have made, is it a fair outcome? If you believe it is fair, then stick with it.
Exactly.
Because, don't we all say that we have good instinct? We like to believe we have good instinct. What is that about? That is our unconscious bias. And very often you are right because of your life experiences, with all the narrative, all the experiences you've had. you know that these things will work.
So now let's look at, let's from the individual context, let's look at cultural context, wherein do you find any differences in these biases that people undergo in any specific, like for example, you have traveled in different countries, especially you have lived in UK and India. There will be definitely a lot of Indianness in you, whereas you have also assimilated the UK or the Western culture. So do you find differences in these biases in a national level perspective? Do you find any differences among countries?
The fundamental difference would be about race.
Okay.
But even then, I would say no, purely because in India, for example, we may not have what I call black versus white, but we still have racial biases. We have a lot of racial ethnicity, I would call it, rather than race, because we're all Indian. But we have a lot of racial, ethnicity biases for people, for example, from Manipur, as opposed to somebody from somewhere else. So there is no question that there are some small nuanced differences between London as opposed to Bombay or Delhi or Cochin or somewhere in India or Calcutta. But that's only small, little minor differences. Unconscious bias is the example I gave you of somebody sitting in Philadelphia 10 years ago. Is exactly the same story as somebody sitting in Delhi.
Correct. Yeah.
Exactly the same story as somebody sitting in Berlin. Exactly the same story as somebody sitting in Penang. So how does it matter? Because there are some things that sadly, and this is sadly, if we talk about women, because you and I are talking about women predominantly, because that's the work that you do, the idea of patriarchy and gender bias is the world over. We have to go to Meghalaya to think about the power of the women. We have to go to, some small, what I would say in Malayalam, Marimakatayam, which is the the inheritance from mother to daughter and so on in Kerala. But these are all tiny, tiny, minuscule pockets. And there's another little tiny village off the coast of China, the name of which I can't remember, that is matrilineal. And matriarchal.
I've watched an internet video about a village in Africa, which is completely an island, not an island, like sort of a village completely led by women. And it's a set of women, they do everything. They don't allow men inside that compound.
That's incredible. But see, but these are all exceptions, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the world over, we live in a patriarchal society.
Actually, just to add on, that story is relevant because the leader of that group, she found that village in order to save women who are victims of domestic violence. So all women who were abused by men, their husbands, she saved those women, and she bought a land, I think some acres of land, and she formed a village, and she put all these women there, and they are working and developing their livelihood. That's an incredible story. I forgot the name of that village, but that was a story.
You must find out more and share that with me. Yeah. And in fact, in relation to that, I read an article in today's Guardian newspaper about 26 women in the United Kingdom who have started, for want of a better word, an elderly care home, but it's not a care home at all. There are 26 women who are aged between, I think it was 58 and 90, or 60 and 90, something like that, who many of them are still working. Some of them have partners, they have lovers, but they say they can come and stay, but they have to leave. We want just the women to live there. So it's all just the women. They all live independently, but they live in a commune kind of place where they have a shared, living room and other places like that. Garden, that's all shared, but their flats they're independent. So women are wanting to do that. But at the end of the day, Chandra, these are all exceptions.
Correct, exactly.
In answer to your original question, culturally, it doesn't matter where we live. Bias is bias, unconscious bias. And especially if we're talking about gender, it is prevalent. I mean, I spoke at a school in Bradford earlier this year in June. And it was a girls' school. And these were class 9, class 10. So they must be 15-year-olds. And all I was talking about was women's empowerment. And I was trying to explain the concept of unconscious bias, but I didn't know. I wanted to make it simple. And I asked them a simple question. I said, think about every single human being on earth. They said, okay, and they nodded away. And I said, how do they exist? And then one person raised a hand and said, woman, we gave birth to them.
Yeah.
Think about the power of that.
Yeah.
Think about the power of that humanity exists on earth for one reason alone, because of the woman.
Exactly.
And yet, the world over, patriarchy will continue.
That's the irony of that. Did you watch the
Actually, movies are making difference, though. You know,
yeah, did you watch the Barbie movie recently?
Not the Barbie movie. I didn't see that, but I've seen Rocky Aur Rani Ki Prem Kahani. And Rocky Aur Rani Ki Prem Kahani in India is challenging gender bias. It's challenging gender bias. It is challenging cancel culture, challenging stereotypes. And that's good. So, you know, you want movies, you want Barbie, you want Rocky Aur Rani Ki Prem Kahani, you want other movies, you want ads, you know, the ads we see in India, the aerial ads. You know, you want things like this
to actually
start little insidiously, implicitly poking us gently. What do you think? Is that fair? Is that correct? Should we do something different?
So I think we need to actually, you know, develop that, or rather the onus of nurturing the next generation of men is also on current generation, where
I can't even tell you how strongly I believe in that. I mean, I am the mother of 3 sons, no daughters. Any kind of bias begins at home. Life experiences, yes, traumatic ones, but even otherwise, it could be that you grew up in a perfectly safe, loving home, but biases are invidiously embedded. I'll tell you an example of research that was done in the United States. And this is a long time ago I read this, so I can't remember how many people, but essentially, a small study, they took about 30 dads who have 2 children, one of each gender.
Okay.
And they clipped them on with audio recording. So there was no video. So it was not too, you know, it wasn't too intrusive. Okay. And they recorded everything that dad said to the 2 children over a period of a few weeks, or I don't know how long. But the point I'm making is, at the end of that research, when the recordings were analyzed, in every single case, the dad spoke very differently to the girl than he did to the boy.
Wow.
Every single case. And so, now I don't know what that feels like, because I don't have a daughter. Would I have done that? Maybe I would have. I don't know. But we're talking about father and father's influence on the 2 children. So, for example, the little girl falls and breaks, you know, bruises her knee. Daddy will kiss her better and make her feel better. The little boy falls down and bruises his knee. He says, come on, cello, get up, move on.
That's, you know, you're a boy, you're a man.
What is that doing to the 2 children?
Yeah.
From the age of 2, 3, 4. Because these 2 children are under the age of 4. It doesn't matter which one was first and which one second. Think about that. Already, the girl is thinking she can be in touch with her feelings and cry. The boy is saying, I have to be a man.
Right.
And that influences them in a way you cannot even imagine.
I think that is one problem that previous generation, currently, I think most parents are a little more conscious, and because of education, another thing. But I think maybe my parents' generation or even my grandparents' generation would have definitely followed that system where, you know, the girls were obviously secondary, you know, the way they are treated.
Not in my generation. I'm older than you, Chandra. We were very, very lucky. If you ask my brother, he would say the girls were favored.
Really?
Honest, true story. Honest, true story. 1 son and 2 daughters, firstborn son. And there's no question that the girls were the apple of my mother's eye.
Yeah.
And my father's eye.
I think, but don't you think that is a special case? I mean, considering
it is a special case. It is a special case.
Yeah, I don't think
that is one of the reasons why I do what I do.
Yeah. That's precisely so.
You look back, you think about your childhood, you think about how you grew up, and you realize how lucky you are.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and if I was so lucky, then let me try and I have that privilege, if you like, for want of a better word. Let me try and explain to other people that not everybody is born with that privilege.
Exactly.
Let's help you understand your challenges. Let's help you understand how you can empower yourself, despite the fact that you may not have grown up in an equal household.
Just, to ease the air, I want you to share any funny incidents from your childhood, which you think has funny, or maybe some impactful incident from your childhood with your family, you said about your brother and sister, they have definitely influenced you. So any interesting story would you like to share?
Before we moved to Calcutta, we were living in Bombay. And I'll share a very funny story, which is my brother's story, not mine, which tells you very clearly the kind of home we grew up in, where we were not judged, or we were not influenced.
Okay.
So my father was very much anti-caste.
Mm-hmm.
He hated the idea of caste.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though we're Malayalis, he did not want anybody to know what our caste name was.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he needed to get a surname, what he did is he took his house name. Mm-hmm. So in Kerala, we have names. For those of us who are not from Kerala, I'm explaining. We have names for our house, which is called a Tharwad, your ancestral home. Traditionally, we take our mother's house name. But in this instance, my father, being a little bit more modern, took his mother's house name, which is Tharoor, and gave us the surname Tharoor.
Yeah, that's how all three of you became Tharoors.
Tharoor, exactly. Whereas his eldest brother, who was 13, 14 years older, he was T. Parameshwar. That is how the names were. T for Tharoor, which is your mother's house name, and then Parameshwar. But we became Tharoor. Now, those days growing up, nobody had a clue where we were from, what part of India, what national, what caste, nothing. No, what religion, nobody knew anything. Maybe by our first name, but certainly not by our surname. So now fast forward to my brother in school in Bombay, in Campion School in Bombay. And he was acting as the artful dodger in Oliver Twist. Okay. And he did a superb job of the acting. And somebody, and I'm not sure whether I should name the actor, but a very famous actor who was then still young, was 3 or 4 years senior to him in the same school, came up to him, very famous actor, who is now subsequently passed away, I won't say anymore, came up to him and said, "Hey, you come up here." And brother saying, "Oh my God," because the whole family is very famous. Yeah. So that boy was not famous at this point, but his father was extremely famous. Okay. His uncle was extremely famous. And so this boy is pulling him up and he said, "Oh my God, so-and-so's son has called me up." And he says, "Boy, you did a good job acting. What caste are you?" Oh. He had no clue. Mm-hmm. He had no clue what his caste was, because we had never been told what our caste was, because it was irrelevant to us. Exactly. I mean, he went home crying to daddy saying, "Why have you told me so-and-so asked me?" I couldn't tell him, but that's besides the point. The point is, we did not grow up with the idea of caste. Growing up in Calcutta, in the building next door, there was somebody who I will name, Desmond Doig, who used to be the editor of JS, Junior Statesman, who was gay. At no point did my parents say to us that homosexuality is bad. At no point. At no point did they say to my brother, "Oh, don't go to Desmond's house, or he's gay." Never. We went to his home. We spent time with him. We didn't see him as anybody else other than Desmond Doig, editor of Junior Statesman.
I really wish that the world dictionary even removes the word caste, But unfortunately, to my great surprise, once I came to Silicon Valley, I came, I think in the last, around 1 year back, there was this big IT companies, I think, is it Apple or Google? They have come out with a anti-caste discrimination policy.
Well, they have to. Really they have to. They have to, unfortunately.
Set up a policy like that itself means that it was existing, and that is painful.
That is the point. It continues today. How naive was I growing up in India thinking it didn't matter? Because we were lucky. My normal was saying caste doesn't matter, but caste does matter. And people are influenced negatively all the time. And what we have to do in our own tiny little way is try and negate that.
Since I wanted to know, I know you're so passionate about this area and you want to continue working. Is there any passion project, or is there anything that you really want to achieve in the next few years?
Well, I've started a podcast, which I am enjoying enormously, where I interview people around the world. And the podcast is simply called Stories Seldom Told.
Yes.
And I interview people around the world, to countries that I've never been to and may never go to, and to people I will never meet, who have been incredible in sharing their own ideas and stories of resilience, of being challenged because of their own trauma or their own experiences, and challenging those biases that they might have had. And then we all learn from that. So to me, that is powerful. And that passion project, use the word passion, which is why I'm continuing with that idea, is something that I don't want to stop. It takes up a lot of time hosting a podcast, as you well know, but it gives me a lot of pleasure. At some point, watch the space, I need to write a book. And I want to write a book about lessons learned, life lessons learned, about resilience, about what have we learned, not just me because of my childhood or my upbringing, but from all these stories of the wonderful people that I have interviewed. What have they taught me, and what can we take away from it?
All the best with that. And with that, I think I'll come to a quick rapid fire round. A very, just 3 or 4 questions on first one. What is your favorite book? I know you like Daniel Kahneman. Other than that,
no, I mean, I like Daniel Kahneman in relation to unconscious bias. So the truth is, I have read so much that it's hard for me to choose a favorite book.
I know. No, what is your favorite book from your brother's writing? I know he has written so many books. Is there any specific?
Oh God, there's no competition. The Great Indian Novel. So clever. So very clever, because it tells us so much about India under the guise of being fiction. So that's hands down, no competition on that one.
Right. So the next is about your favorite place. Do you have any place which you're so close? Of course, you said about Calcutta, but
Calcutta. My 2 favorite cities are London and Calcutta.
I would like you to share some, your daily routine, or you as a woman leader, how do you, plan your days, and any tips on that for our audience?
I think what's really, really, really important, and I want to say that to all of us women who are listening to this interview, is do not try hard to prove yourself all the time. It's called tightrope bias. I think what is far more important is be kind to yourself and do what gives you passion and what you love. It could be that you're working in an environment that does not give you passion, but still, be kind to yourself. Don't keep trying to prove that you are better than everybody else because you feel you need to, because of what they call the tightrope bias. Because there is, tightrope bias essentially means that women, and it's predominantly women, have to keep proving that they're better than the men, otherwise they don't get the promotion and so on. Instead, the advice that I would give to all of us, including me, and I give myself that same advice, and it's taken me a long time, and I'm fortunately older and wiser than you, thank God. I don't know about wiser, but in this instance, older definitely, but wiser now, about giving myself me time.
Yes.
I give myself me time because I think it is important. Because if I give myself me time, then I love myself. Because at the end of the day, the first thing that you must do is to love yourself. And only if you love yourself and accept who you are, will you then go to the next stage of doing a good job at work, being a good leader, being a good manager, being a good colleague, being a good mother, a wife, a friend, whatever you want to call it. All the multiple roles that all of us women hold all the time. But first learn to accept who you are, love yourself, be kind to yourself, and then move on.
Right. So this is like, when you do, especially a woman, when you have more of self-love, you are equated to being selfish. And that actually is a lot of pressure. But now at this age, at this point, I don't fall into that. But there are a lot of women who actually fall into that pressure. And then they again try to, self-loathe. I mean, they don't love themselves that much, or they try to underplay themselves.
And this is a classic example of unconscious bias. And unfortunately, if you're 25 or 30, as opposed to say 40 or 50, there is a truth in age and experience, because you want so hard, you're in the early stages of your career, and you want so hard to prove yourself and do the right thing, that you play the game. And therefore you try to not love yourself. But I am saying to all of you listening, they are wrong, you are right, you are not being selfish. Because you have to be kind to yourself. You have to be loving yourself. Because if a man does that, nobody's going to say, hello, look how selfish he's being. No one is going to say that. But the woman does it, they look differently because expectations of women, it comes back to our original conversation about patriarchy, is the same around the world. And so do whatever you can, little by little, baby steps. It's not going to be easy. Do a mantra. I remember Vidya Balan saying to me in my podcast interview that she didn't love herself, and she would look at herself in front of the mirror, and she would tell herself, talk to herself in the mirror. Say nice things to yourself every morning before you leave the house on work or wherever you're starting, even if you're not leaving the home, talking to yourself. I love you. You're great. You are beautiful. Just look at yourself. Say life-affirming, positive things to yourself. It sounds really cheesy, but it works for some people. If it works for Vidya Balan, it can work for us.
Definitely. Okay, so that actually brings me to the end of this lovely conversation. I know this can continue for hours together because there's so much of knowledge in you which can be extracted. But due to time constraint of this podcast, I think we will have to say bye-bye to this wonderful, amazing woman leader, Smita Tharoor ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast today. And I really look forward to learning more from your words and continue to do all the impactful work that you have been doing. Not just you, I think your entire Tharoor family is doing amazing work across the globe. So really hats off to your parents. I have to really acknowledge that you did acknowledge, but from my side also thanks to them to actually produce such world citizens who are doing amazing work in their own fields. Thank you once again for joining in this podcast, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very, very much, Chandra, and wish you all the very best because you are a mover and shaker. You're a remarkable woman. And I know many, many people are going to say, oh, Chandra, wow, that's lucky. That's where you're going. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.